This is a subcommittee hearing on House Study Bill 569, which is an act creating capital murder offense by establishing the penalty of death for murder in the first degree.
I'm here to speak in opposition to reinstatement of the death penalty in the state of Iowa. 4 years ago from next Tuesday, February 6, 2014, two of my daughters, Sarah and Susie, who were living in Pittsburgh, had someone invade their house and kill each of them. Bullets in the back of their head. They were just like executed. At every step of their education and their careers, Susie and Sarah affirmed the sanctity of life and the importance of even the least among us. Human life is precious. Each human life has potential to contribute to others, and destroying that potential is a serious offense against our whole community. When the state kills the defendant, we send the message that life is expendable and that it can be extinguished by the party with the greater power, whether that be a murderer or the state. When we practice eye for an eye, the whole world will end up blind.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Baptist Convention of Iowa. We support the fair and equitable use of capital punishment by civil magistrates as a legitimate form of punishment.
The reason that I would argue at this point in time for the bill is actually sacredness of life. I would see it on the perspective that because life is sacred and we need dignity and security, there should be a place for the rare occasion when the death penalty should be used.
We are firmly opposed to this. We represent thousands and thousands of Iowans across the state of all faith traditions, not only Christian, Protestant, and Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, people who are atheist and agnostic as well.
I am opposed to this both personally and as chair of the Board of Directors for the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. The justice system in this country is not as blind as portrayed in the statute that represents it. Our African American citizens are far more likely to face incarceration and execution than white citizens. Those with financial resources fare much better than those who rely on public defenders. The death penalty cannot be fairly applied as long as our justice system is so badly skewed, and the consequences of this inherent unfairness are too dire to ignore. Here we are again, trying to convince ourselves that it will make us safer when it will not. But when vengeance masquerades as justice, we find ourselves on the side of injustice.
Death penalty cases are more complex, costly, and time-consuming than any other type of case. Investigations, trial motions, jury selection, post-conviction actions, and other aspects of a trial are magnified in terms of time and cost.
The chaplain at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women for 17 years, and 6 of those years I was director of religion for all of the prisons. I do not believe that House Bill HSB 569 will make Iowa safe. 6 main reasons why to stop this bill. It is not a deterrent. Innocent people will be killed. There's racial discrepancy in the death penalty. The cost of killing offenders is greater than giving them a life sentence. It demoralizes prison staff, and it lowers the civility of the state. Since 1973, 161 people have been released from death row because they were later acquitted, pardoned, or had their charges dismissed. So you have to ask, how many people have we killed who did not commit the crime? Prison staff are the ones who are forced to take out this act. It weighs heavy on their heart and their conscience, and it affects all the staff. I would like to respectfully ask you to vote against this bill.
Our goal is to push against this bill and to raise up the awareness of how now do we get into them, not only to bring them back into a spot where they can have the respect and dignity of life themselves, but administer to them with the gospel full force.
Iowa already has a de facto death sentence. A life sentence here truly means life without the possibility of parole. Defendants convicted of first-degree murder in Iowa die in prison, where Iowa fortunately has a very low murder rate. Iowa's entire judicial system would suffer of the overwhelming demands of an added capital case. Iowa Supreme Court justices have said that the result of implementing a death penalty, quote, would be that appeals filed by ordinary citizens in other cases would be put on the back burner.
Problem in the state of Illinois, there were 13 individuals that we know now through DNA evidence and other evidence from the courts that were executed that were innocent. And so when you execute an innocent person, not only do you not get justice, but you get injustice. And if you execute an innocent person, who does that? Well, the state executes them. And who is the state? That's us, that's the people.
Every government officer throughout every step of this process must be right every time for our hands to be clean. That is an arresting officer, that is a prosecutor, that is a judge, that is a state public defender. We make mistakes. In an instance in which a human life is at stake, we can't afford to.
Executions are horrors from which Iowans have been free. Killing is clearly wrong. Upon this, Scripture and law agree. So why we return to state killing is hard to see. Capital punishment is a product of barbaric time, a remnant of uncivilized cultures of inhumane grime. Executions are at odds with true modern paradigm. Those who argue that death is justified for some ugly acts cannot justify their claim upon any recognized facts. Contrary to data, they move heedless of racial impacts. Minorities are convicted here with ease when tried. Prison numbers show the courts do not set prejudices aside. Killing is just wrong. Haven't enough people died? The death penalty's a blight, internationally rejected. It's an evil masked as good, from which we must be protected. Thank you.
As a victim of a violent crime, I stand here opposed to the death penalty. I remember the terror I felt of a person's hands around my throat, squeezing my life's breath out of me. If it lasted much longer, I would not be before you today. If I died, it would have been to cover up another crime against me. It took me a long while to come to the point of forgiving the perpetrators. Forgiveness does not shove the crime under the rug or say that what happened to me wasn't devastating, but it is a way to heal. Vengeance does not promote healing. It just keeps the wound open and oozing. The death penalty is just state-sponsored vengeance. It will put blood on my hands and that of every taxpayer in Iowa. It brings us to the same level as a perpetrator. I don't want blood on my hands. I strongly urge you to oppose the reinstatement of the death penalty in Iowa. Thank you very much.
I'm here to state that I'm against the death penalty. The death penalty is tainted by racial bias in its application. As hard as we might work to make it not be biased, Justice Harry Blackmun once said, "It shouldn't surprise us that the biases and prejudice that infect our society generally determine who is sentenced to death." The only purpose remaining that I can see for the death penalty is revenge. And frankly, my God is kinder than that.
This bill has been an interesting journey for me, in a way. Conceptually and morally, I believe the death penalty for certain horrific crimes is absolutely appropriate, such as the ones that were just detailed by Representative Hartzell. Yet practically, I arrived at a different conclusion than I expected. I have always believed that life in prison costs taxpayers so much more money, yet I found out in researching this legislation that in fact it costs more to have someone on death row. I have always believed that the death penalty was a deterrent, and while I still believe in some situations that that might be the case, or at least useful in the case that Representative Hartzell spoke about, in general, based on the data, the death penalty is not a successful deterrent. It is also true that the infrastructure necessary to reinstate the death penalty would be very costly. I think the county attorneys alluded to that. I'm also struck as I did my research just how many individuals are wrongfully convicted in our country. And as a result of DNA evidence, we're seeing that more and more today. And it really strikes me deep at the thought of executing someone who is innocent. Finally, and most difficult for me from a moral perspective, is how to administer the death penalty fairly. Statistics show, without a doubt, that those of lesser means are more likely to receive the death penalty than are those with greater assets and ability to hire the best attorneys. So my conclusion after researching this bill was not exactly what I expected. I support the death penalty in theory and believe it is absolutely morally okay based upon my faith. But I have great issues with its practical and prudent and fair application. So this is what will now take place. I will advance the bill to full committee for additional consideration, but I do so with grave reservations as to its practical and fair application, and I will certainly express that to my fellow committee members. I truly appreciate your time today and for sharing your strong convictions. God bless you. This committee is adjourned. You know, I think it's important up here that we challenge our preconceived notions. So when actually researching the bill in terms of its practical application, I arrived at the conclusion I did based upon the research I did. The fact that it actually costs more to administer the death penalty. The fact that it is extremely difficult to administer it fairly when you take into account those that can hire, you know, attorneys because they have a great amount of means to do so versus an individual that might have a public defender. So all of these things came together to convince me that while I believe it is absolutely appropriate that the state administer the death penalty, I have big problems with it from a practical perspective.
Does that mean you'll vote no on any of them?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And just for a
Why advance it?
clarifications came to you after
I agreed to run the bill in subcommittee, believing that I support the death penalty in practice. That hasn't changed. I suppose what did change for me was for the practicality issue. As far as why advancing the bill, it is because I think it's important for the full committee to have this discussion if they choose to.
Do you have a sense?
And I don't know that they will.